I was still in the pickup line at Piper's kindergarten when the first photo appeared on my phone. It was a Wednesday afternoon in late November, cold enough that I'd left the car running, and Piper had been inside finishing some kind of turkey craft that her teacher had mentioned at drop-off. I wasn't really thinking about my phone. I was thinking about whether I'd remembered to defrost the butter for the pie crust, and whether Scott had confirmed with his mother what time we were supposed to arrive tomorrow. Then the notification came through, and I glanced down, and everything that had been ordinary about that afternoon stopped being ordinary. It was a photo of Scott. He was standing next to Dolores at what was very clearly her dining room table, wearing his gray wool sweater, the one I'd ordered for him 2 weeks earlier and hidden in the back of the hall closet, because I was going to give it to him for his birthday in December. He had his arm around his mother. They were both smiling. The caption said, "Finally, the whole family together for Thanksgiving." Austin was in the corner of the frame, so was Christine. Christine was Austin's mother, Scott's ex-wife. It was the day before Thanksgiving. Piper came out of school then, backpack bouncing, holding a small paper plate painted to look like a turkey. She'd glued on real feathers from the craft bin and they were coming loose in the wind. Mom, hold this. Hold it flat." I held it flat. She climbed into her car seat and told me very seriously that we had to get home fast because Grandma Dolores had to see it before the feathers fell off. "Grandma Dolores," she said. "She's going to love the feathers." I drove home. I didn't say anything about the photo. That night, after I got Piper bathed and into bed, I called Scott. He answered on the second ring, which surprised me. There was noise in the background. Music, voices, the specific low hum of a house full of people who'd just eaten. "Hey, what's up?" "What's up?" I sat on the edge of our bed and looked at the phone in my hand. "What time should we head over tomorrow?" A long pause. Not an I'm thinking pause, a different kind. The kind where someone is deciding something. Then Dolores came on. Not Scott, Dolores, like he'd simply handed her the phone. "Megan, honey. Hi." Just Dolores calling me Megan, which she'd done for 11 years despite the fact that no one in my life has ever called me that. "We already did Thanksgiving." She said it the way you'd say we already ran that errand. Light. Finished. "I'm sorry?" "We had everyone over yesterday. Austin was in from Columbus and it just made sense to do it then." A small pause. "You know how scheduling is." I looked at the bedroom wall. We had green paint. I'd picked that green specifically. I remembered the weekend we painted it. "The whole family," I said. "Well, Austin and Christine were here. Scott's uncle stopped by, a few cousins." Christine, and nobody thought to call me. "Megan, don't make this into a whole thing." I'd heard some version of that sentence for 11 years. Don't make it something it isn't. Don't be sensitive. Don't take it personally. I'd gotten quite good at hearing it and setting it down like a dish I didn't want to break. This time I set it somewhere else. Put Scott back on. Scott took a moment to come back. When he did, he said my name like it was a warning. "Meg. You had Thanksgiving without me and Piper. Mom just wanted." Piper made Dolores a turkey. She made it at school today. She was excited to give it to her tomorrow. A beat of silence, then, "She's 5, she'll be fine." I felt something very specific happen behind my eyes. Not tears, something quieter and colder than tears. "Okay," I said, "we'll talk when you get home." He came home a little after 10. I heard his key in the lock and didn't move from the kitchen table. The wool sweater was gone. He'd changed into a different shirt. Maybe he'd thought I wouldn't ask about it, or maybe he just hadn't thought. I asked anyway. He said he'd found it in the closet, that it was cold, that he hadn't realized I was saving it. Then he said, "Come on," in the tone people use when they want you to be the one who lets it go. "Why didn't you tell me Thanksgiving was moved?" He sat down across from me. Mom wanted everyone together. Austin had a narrow window. Austin's been living in Columbus for 3 years. He visits on regular weekends. Scott rubbed the back of his neck. Christine was coming. I waited. "You and Christine in the same room," he said. "It gets tense." "Christine and I have been in the same room at least a dozen times." I paused. "Name one where I made things difficult." He looked at the table. "Give me one example." "Nothing." So you decided the easier solution was to exclude your wife and your daughter. Piper's 5. He said this like it answered something. She's 5, and she painted a turkey for her grandmother, and she came out of school today telling me we had to hurry home so the feathers wouldn't fall off. I kept my voice level. I had learned a long time ago that the steadier you are, the harder you are to dismiss. What did you tell your mother about why we weren't there? He looked up. Scott, he said, I told her you weren't comfortable coming, if Christine was going to be there. I felt the kitchen go quiet in a particular way. You told your mother that I refused to come. I said you were uncomfortable. Like those were different sentences. And Piper? He was quiet. What did you say about Piper? I said she was staying home with you. I looked at him for a long moment. He had put my name on a decision I'd never made, handed my daughter's absence to his mother like it was my fault, and then come home wearing the birthday gift I'd hidden for him. I said, Did you plan this before Christine was even invited? He didn't answer. That was the answer. Good to know, I said, and I went to bed. Austin called the next morning, Thanksgiving morning. I was in the kitchen with Piper, who was eating cereal and drawing another turkey because she had decided to give Dolores one whether we went over or not. Austin's name on my phone was unexpected enough that I stepped into the hallway. Hey Meg, I'm sorry about yesterday. Dad told us you didn't want to come. I leaned against the wall. What exactly did he tell you? Austin sighed. He sounded uncomfortable, which I appreciated. He said you told him you wouldn't be there if Mom was there, that you'd made that clear weeks ago. A pause. He also said Piper was too young to care about the holiday. I closed my eyes. He told everyone not to text you about it, Austin said. He said it would just make things awkward since you'd already decided. I never said any of that. The silence on his end had a specific weight. I know, I figured that out at dinner. Something Grandma said didn't add up. He lowered his voice. How far back does the planning go? I don't know yet. I asked Dad 2 weeks ago if you and Piper were coming, and he said he'd check with you. I think he never checked. After I hung up, I stood in the hallway for a moment. Piper's crayon was moving against paper in the kitchen. I listened to it. Scott had not forgotten to tell me. He had arranged not to tell me. He had told his family a story, that I had chosen to stay home, that I was the source of the discomfort, and then he had let Thanksgiving happen while I was here thinking tomorrow was our day. I went back into the kitchen and helped Piper put feathers on her second turkey. I called the bank on Friday morning. Not to do anything dramatic. I called because 6 weeks earlier, Scott had asked me to look into refinancing options for Dolores's house. She had a leaking roof, some credit card debt, and a fixed income that didn't quite cover everything. Scott's contracting company had failed 4 years ago. His credit hadn't recovered. Mine had. I worked as a commercial real estate appraiser, and after 20 years, my financials were solid enough that I'd agreed, reluctantly, to help Dolores access a home equity loan. We'd talked about something in the range of $85,000 to cover the roof and consolidate her debt. I hadn't seen the final paperwork. The loan officer's name was Jessica. She confirmed there was a pending application in my name and said she'd email me the package right away. I opened it at the kitchen table, coffee on one side, Piper's turkey spread across the other. The loan amount was $128,000. I read it again, then once more. I called Scott. He answered on the third ring, sounding distracted. Yeah? The loan for your mother is $128,000. A pause. There's additional debt consolidation. How much additional? I'd have to check. You've been managing this process for 2 months. I scrolled further into the document. Mortgage balance, credit card totals, roof estimate, closing costs. Then one more line. There's a cash-out amount, about $30,000. Quiet. What's the $30,000 for? She wanted a cushion. A $30,000 cushion. She's 70, she needs reserves, Meg. Why didn't anyone tell me? I wasn't yelling. I wasn't even close to yelling. The steadier you sound, the harder it is to dismiss you. Scott, I agreed to help with the roof and some debt. I did not agree to borrow $128,000. We can go through it properly when you calm down. I looked at the document. My employer, My income, our joint tax history, he'd had access to all of it. We filed jointly, kept financial records in the same home office drawer, and months ago I'd filled out a preliminary form to get things started. Nothing looked forged, that almost made it worse. He hadn't stolen my identity. He had just kept the loan moving while letting me believe we were discussing one number and actually processing another. I called a lawyer I'd been referred to by a colleague, a woman named Colleen, who answered on the second and apologized for background noise because her kids were home for the holiday. I gave her the short version: Thanksgiving, the lie, the loan, the amount, the cash out. She asked practical questions. Had I signed the closing documents? No. Had I authorized any disbursement? No. Had I moved money out of joint accounts? No. Don't, she said, and don't sign anything you haven't read completely. Then she said the thing I wrote down on a notepad and kept: declining to borrow $128,000 for another person is not revenge. It's a financial decision. The $30,000 stopped being abstract on Saturday evening. Austin called again. He'd been helping Dolores sort through a filing cabinet. She kept everything in stacks, a personal philosophy she defended like a constitutional right, and he'd found something. He sent me a photo. I opened it at the kitchen counter. It was a printed email from a property management company in Myrtle Beach, a 2-bedroom vacation condo, seasonal ownership program. Deposit listed at the bottom, $30,000. At the bottom of the page, in Dolores's own handwriting, were 6 words: Scott says Meg will sign after Thanksgiving. I stood there reading it. Then I looked up, and Scott was coming through the side door from the garage. He stopped when he saw my face. I turned the phone around. He said, "Austin sent you that." "Tell me about Myrtle Beach," I said. He set his keys on the counter. He said it wasn't what it looked like. I asked him to tell me what it was. He said his mother had always wanted a place to go in the winter. His father had talked about it for years. They'd never gotten to do it. She was 70 and she deserved something nice. "I agree," I said. "She deserves a roof that doesn't leak. She deserves her debt handled." I kept my voice level. What she doesn't have the right to do is borrow money using my income and my credit to put a deposit on a vacation property she never mentioned to me. "You make it sound like she's stealing." "Then why didn't anyone tell me?" He looked away. "Scott." "Because," he said, "you would have said no." There it was. Not a miscommunication, not a scheduling problem, not a misunderstanding about amounts. He had known what I would say if I saw the full picture, so he had managed the picture I saw. I looked at him for a long moment. "When were you going to tell me?" "At the closing. I was going to explain everything there." "At the closing," I repeated. So I'd be sitting in front of a notary, finding out for the first time that I was borrowing $40,000 more than I thought, with $30,000 going to a beach property. He said nothing. "Okay," I said, and I went to check on Piper. The bank branch had beige walls, gray carpet, and a small artificial poinsettia on the front desk that looked like it had been there since the Reagan administration. It was the Monday after Thanksgiving, 10 a.m. I arrived 3 minutes early. Scott and Dolores were already in the lobby, along with Austin, who looked like he hadn't slept. Dolores wore a camel-colored coat and the expression of someone who had convened this meeting to correct an error, not to answer for one. Jessica led us into a small conference room and offered coffee. Dolores accepted. I said no thank you. Austin said no thank you. Scott stared at the table. When Jessica stepped out, Dolores looked at Austin and said, "I hope you understand that none of this was necessary." Austin glanced at me. I said nothing. "Your father and Megan had a disagreement about the holiday," Dolores continued, "and now she's brought my home into it." I let her finish. That seemed to surprise her more than an argument would have. Jessica returned with the coffee and opened her folder. I said, "Jessica, before we get started, would you mind telling everyone at the table the total amount of the proposed loan?" Dolores stopped stirring. Jessica looked at Scott, then at me, then said carefully, "The total proposed amount is $128,000. Austin looked up. He looked at Dolores. "I thought this was for the roof." "It includes debt consolidation," Dolores said. I slid my copy of the loan summary toward him. He read it. I watched him reach the cash-out line. $30,000 cash to borrower, he said. What's that for? Living expenses, reserves. Grandma, his voice was careful. Tell me what it's actually for. I put the Myrtle Beach printout on the table. Dolores set down her coffee cup. Austin read the email, then he read the note at the bottom. 6 words in blue pen, he set it down slowly. You were using Meg's credit to put a deposit on a vacation condo, he said. It is an investment property, Dolores said, a very modest seasonal one. That Meg had no idea was part of this loan. Your father was handling the details. Austin looked at Scott. Scott looked at the table. I said, Dolores, I want to ask you directly. Did you write at the bottom of that email that I would sign after Thanksgiving? The room went still. Somewhere behind the front desk, the coffee machine made a sound like it was fighting with itself. Dolores said, that was a private note. Yes, I said it was. She turned to Scott. This is exactly what I warned you about. She has to make everything into an investigation. Austin shook his head slowly. Grandma, Dad lied to everybody. He said it the way you state a fact you wish weren't true. He told us Meg refused to come to Thanksgiving. He told us Piper was too young to care. He told us Meg had already agreed to the full loan amount. None of that was true. Dolores opened her mouth, then she closed it. That was the moment I had expected to feel something satisfying. I didn't. I felt the particular exhaustion that comes from being right about something you'd hoped you were wrong about. Jessica said quietly, we don't have to proceed today. We're not proceeding, I said. Then I looked at Dolores. I'm not signing the loan. You gave your word. I gave my word about the roof. I kept my voice even, that offer still stands. I'll contribute directly to the roofing contractor for the actual repair. I will not sign a $128,000 loan, and I will not finance a deposit on a property that nobody told me about. You are humiliating this family. I didn't bring Myrtle Beach into this room, I said. You did. She pushed her chair back. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody stormed out. The meeting just ended. The way some things end, not with a scene but with silence. Paper went back into a folder. A pen that had never been uncapped stayed capped. My name stayed off a document I hadn't agreed to sign. In the parking lot, Scott followed me to my car. Are you leaving me? He asked. It was the most honest thing he'd said all morning. I stopped and turned around. I'm staying with my sister for a while. That's not what I asked. I know. He had his hands in his coat pockets. He looked older than he had a week ago. What do you want me to do? There had been a time in our marriage when that question would have sent me directly into fix-it mode. Find the therapist. Talk to Dolores. Explain things, repair things, smooth things over. I had smoothed a lot of things. I opened my car door. For once, Scott, figure out what you did without asking me to help you figure it out. My sister Fran lived 20 minutes away in a house with a guest room that smelled like cedar and a cat whose name I could never remember. Piper and I stayed there for 3 weeks. I drove her to kindergarten every morning, picked her up every afternoon, made her grilled cheese and tomato soup, because I couldn't face cooking anything more complicated than that. On the 3rd day, she asked when we were going home. This is home for right now, I said. She thought about it. Daddy's house is home too. Yes, I said it is. That seemed to satisfy her in the way 5-year-olds are sometimes satisfied. Not because they understand something, but because they trust that you do. I tried not to let that trust make me feel worse than I already felt. Scott called every few days. The first 2 weeks, every call included a reason. His mother had pressured him. He hadn't thought the loan details through. He hadn't realized how far the process had moved. He was embarrassed, he said. Not about Christine, but about something older and harder to say. Dolores called him whenever she needed something, and every time, he had to come to me. Everyone in his family knew it. When his company went under, he'd lost more than a business. He'd lost the particular kind of standing that he hadn't figured out how to rebuild. And over the years, while I'd been quietly taking over the bills and the insurance and the bigger decisions, he'd started to feel like a passenger in a life that had my name on it more than his. I understood that, I genuinely did. What I could not understand was what he had chosen to do with the feeling. We started marriage counseling in February. At the 3rd session, He was still building his case, still explaining, still finding new ways to make the explanation comprehensive. Our counselor stopped him mid-sentence. "Scott," she said, "are you trying to help Meg understand your choices, or are you trying to get her to agree that they were understandable?" He stopped talking. "Those are different conversations," she said. "One of them helps, the other one asks more of her." The room was quiet for a long time after that. Something changed after that session, not overnight. But he stopped defending and started listening. He became transparent about the rest of the loan process. Austin helped Dolores renegotiate the roof work with a local contractor and strip the cash out entirely, and I kept my original offer and paid directly toward the repair. Some people thought I was foolish for doing even that. I didn't think so. I'd made a promise about the roof. Keeping it mattered to me even when other people hadn't kept theirs. Dolores was difficult for months. Her texts ranged from cold to theatrical. One began, "I hope someday you understand what you have taken from this family." I thought about what I would say in response. I typed it, then I deleted it. Growth sometimes is just pressing delete instead of send. She asked to see Piper in the spring. I said yes, but I gave her conditions. No criticizing me in front of Piper. No discussing the separation with her. No telling her that Thanksgiving had happened the way it did because of anything I had done. Dolores didn't like the conditions. She followed them anyway, because she didn't have another option. The first visit was in April. She arrived with a stuffed rabbit from Target. Piper hugged her without hesitation. I made coffee. Everyone was so careful with each other that the first 15 minutes felt like a diplomatic function. Then Piper disappeared down the hallway and came back carrying the turkey. Both turkeys, actually, the paper plate one, and the second one she'd made at Fran's house in November. She'd kept them in a shoebox under her bed. The feathers on the first one were mostly gone. One corner of the plate was bent. She held them out to Dolores with both hands. "You didn't get them at Thanksgiving," Piper said. Dolores took them carefully, the way you take something when you know you haven't earned it. "I made two," Piper added, in case the feathers fell off the first one. Dolores opened the second one. She touched the painted surface with one finger. Her expression did something complicated. She pressed her lips together and looked up at me, and I looked back at her, and for once neither of us said anything. "Thank you, sweetheart," Dolores said quietly. "There are moments when you could make your point, and there are moments when making it would cost you something you actually want to keep." I let that one alone. By the following November, Scott and I were still legally married and still living in separate places. We had dinner together a few times a month, sometimes with Piper, sometimes just the two of us somewhere quiet. We weren't back together. I didn't know whether we ever would be. That uncertainty used to feel like failure. Eventually, it stopped feeling like anything other than the truth. What Thanksgiving had shown me was that the worst part wasn't being left out of a meal. It was realizing my husband had found it easier to write a story in which I was the difficult one than to stand in a room and be honest about what his life actually looked like. I had something to reckon with, too. For years I had handled what needed handling and called it generosity. After a while, people stop reading generosity as a gift and start treating it as a service they're owed. I had let that happen. I had smoothed things over until the smoothing became invisible and the expectation became permanent. My response in the end was not dramatic. I didn't empty accounts. I didn't make it ugly. I didn't try to make anyone look worse than they had already made themselves look. I just stopped signing my name under decisions other people made without me. You can be generous without making yourself useful to people who don't respect you. And you can forgive someone without handing them back the same access to your life that they misused the first time. If you've ever had one holiday show you exactly where things actually stood, you probably know that it doesn't arrive the way you'd expect. Not like a storm, more like walking into a room and noticing, for the first time, how long it's been cold.